ended up getting an idea for a card game. You know, I ended up designing a card game in 2015. Then I'll do that. You know, whatever I'm inspired to do, I go do that because that's where my purest and most concentrated energy will be. Occupying the space above the sun. Because, you know, they say everything under the sun has already been done.
Yeah.
So my drive and my why is to do something that hasn't been done. You know, I'm driven to innovate, you know.
The harder you grind, the bigger you dream. The harder you grind, the bigger you dream. The harder you grind, the bigger you dream. I said the harder you grind, the bigger you dream. I said you're up and I'm up. Y'all now tuned in to the Grind Hard Dream Big Show. The harder you grind, the bigger you dream. I got a special guest in the building. Go ahead and introduce yourself to the people, man.
Montez Brainard, multifaceted, creative. Yeah, man.
That's what's up, bro. He said multifaceted, creative. I like that. So for the people that don't know, like, what was your upbringing, where you were born and raised, your childhood?
Yeah, I was born and raised in PG County. I lived around PG County, different areas. Fort Washington, Largo, Mitchellville area, District Heights. I spent some time in Laurel. I spent some time in like Glendale area, so I was all around. But most of my time was in Mitchellville, Maryland. Yeah.
Okay, for sure. So like coming up as a kid, did you have any like hobbies, like things you found yourself getting into?
Yeah, I mean, mostly it was art related. You know, I found myself drawing at a young age. My dad is an artist as well, so he was illustrating different like cartoons and stuff like that. I would watch that. I would ask him to draw things for me. Naturally, you know, I picked up on it and started drawing things for myself. Then I went into drawing those things or painting those things on the clothing. And then eventually I got to like heat pressing and screen printing stuff. So, yeah.
That's fire, man. That's fire. So as you were like transitioning and stuff like that, and like I said, fun fact, man, we both went to school together.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Charles Herbert Flowers High School, man. And at that particular time, man, I think that there was so much like greatness and like dopeness in the school because a lot of us were just experimenting. I would say, safe to say, rather you did something on the creative side with the arts or rap or videos or whatever it was, and you just had a plethora of people. A community of people is like, yo, if you knew, you knew, right? But like marketing back then was kind of crazy because it's like, yo, okay, you having your brand, Pilot. You know what I'm saying? Pilot cloth back then. I'm like, yo, okay, bet. I got the shirt. So like, what was the inspiration behind that?
Well, Pilot, I was first I started designing things that interest me.
Okay.
When I started to come up with the brand concept or brand name, a lot of times we talk about getting fly.
Right.
Think about the flies first, and you got the pilot. He's in control of the fly.
Right.
So then that Pilot cloth together, that's the
sure.
fly's clothing.
Right.
So that's what came with like the airplane motif, and I designed a jewel that a lot of people seen, that real colorful jewel.
Right.
Which was interesting because later on, Diamond Supply, I kept getting like messages about that, like yo, somebody using a diamond. And it was Diamond Supply Co., which is based out of L.A., I believe.
Okay.
So that was like my introduction to that too. But yeah, man, I was wearing clothes that I was making, and people was asking me about it. So then I started making stuff for other people.
Right. Yeah, and I think it's you marketed it yourself. Like you marketing your product, and it's like, all right, man, I'm drawing the attention. Yeah. Now all of a sudden it's like you invested in me, but you also invested in the product as well. So I think that's like business 101. You know what I'm saying? In the sense of nobody sat there and took a class, at least to see it on display is like, all right, bet, cool. And what drew me to it, like you said, was the Pilot. You know what I'm saying? And buying the clothes. And I always believe that, supporting your homies, supporting your people, especially like us being classmates, it's like, wait, that could be a game changer. Yeah. For somebody. So with that idea, how were you able to like, transition to like all the other art forms and all the other ideas?
Oh man, I think it was happening kind of like simultaneously. So I was introduced to hip hop around the same time I was introduced to visual art. My mom and my dad were playing a lot of different music in the household when I was young, And I had a cousin named Jarrell who was rapping pretty early. And I think I was probably about 10, 11 years old when I was hearing him rap. And then he put me on to Lil Wayne. And then when I heard Lil Wayne, I was like, oh man, like he's just using words in ways I never seen him use, you know. So I started trying it out myself. And, you know, I remember one time I walked to Rite Aid and I saved up all my change. I got one of those voice recorders like the one you see at court or something.
Yeah.
And I would record my raps on tapes like that. So that was my introduction, to rap music and, you know, being a recording artist.
For sure. And what I think about it as well is like, I feel like everything that you have done, right? You know, we always put 100% into everything that we do. So like, even with the music and you doing that, and then of course the clothes and things like that, I think you were just thinking of a tree, right? And it's like, okay, you see the tree outside, you have multiple branches, and each branch is important. So like, to that, I guess stacking your branches and making sure that they all hold weight. Like, how was that instrumental for you? Because like you said, rapping, fashion, and in those, you know, sectors.
Yeah, I think I just made sure that I liked the product before I released it. You know, I don't really work if I'm not inspired to work. So like, you know, I feel like a lot of times the end result or the product that comes from, you know, your creation is not up to par when you're not fully invested, fully inspired to work on it, you know. So like if I'm not coming up with anything, I don't feel like rapping, I'm not gonna rap. You know, if I don't have any ideas for clothes, I'm not gonna make clothes. You know, if I end up getting an idea for a card game, you know, I end up designing a card game in 2015, then I'll do that. You know, whatever I'm inspired to do, I go do that because that's where my purest and most concentrated energy will be.
I like how you sat there and said concentrate the energy, and I think it's the intentionality behind it, right? I think it's very, very important because some people don't realize, okay, bet you could do it just to do it.
Yeah.
But it's like, nah, you want to make sure it's purposeful, intentional, making the impact. I'm in the right space when I'm creating this thing.
Yeah.
So that way people can see that and
receive it.
Receive it in that way. So as you were transitioning, you know, what was that moment where you felt like, okay, like this is me. I ain't gotta really dumb nothing down. I feel like I've arrived in the space. I'm getting more confidence. Like, what was that moment for you?
Oh, man, I mean, from the beginning, you know, I never really felt like I arrived. I just still to this day, I'm just doing what I want to do. Yeah, like I'm just letting my instinct drive me. And you know, anything I feel, I go for it. Like, you know, we talked earlier. Like before I came in here, I was outside getting onions, getting garlic. You know, I got a natural interest in foraging from mushrooms. You know, that was my start. I'd say sometime around the pandemic, I started thinking about self-sustainability. And even like with like veganism, and I found out that there were mushrooms that mimic meats. And I thought about the easiest transition for people who don't want to stop eating meat, you know, to have something that's like a meat substitute, you know, still a lot of protein and things like that, but it's just not actually meat. So you got mushrooms that mimic chicken, that mimic shrimp, that mimic steak, you know, all these different type of things. That's what first interested me in like finding that bridge to my people, you know, and how what could be an easy grab for them. And that got me outside and making me more aware of other things. So then I started looking at plants and things like that. But I say that's up there with, you know, rapping and designing as well right now at this point.
Nah, for sure. I definitely think that that's vital and key. So, like, as, you know, you're transitioning through everything, right? Like, what is networking like, man, for you? Because, like I said, I feel like, you know, our gifts, our passions, they could take us so many places. So,
Yeah.
like, how's the networking space been like for you in this art?
You know, I think I like to make it organic. You know what I mean? Like where there's a connection, there'll be a connection. Something my grandfather said was, you know, they say like it's not what you know, it's who you know. My grandfather always said it's who knows you, because you could know somebody that doesn't know you, and then that connection never happens, right? So you got to make yourself available and like make people aware of what you got going on for them to even have an interest in connecting with you.
Facts.
Yeah.
Facts. And like for me, like I said, to see the, elevation from what you're doing, man. I think it's very inspiring, and you're very creative with your process. I can tell you're very intentional about it, very conscious, and things of that nature. So, as you're navigating, what does consistency mean to you? Because I think that, in a digital age, obviously with social media, Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, Facebook, however you market your stuff, even beyond that, a website, these AI things. You know what I'm saying? That's a whole other conversation. But the level of how you measure consistency, like, how would you measure that?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, it's been pretty challenging. I think like that, when I talk about being inspired to do something, the way like an artist was perceived like before, you've seen them when you've seen them. You got stuff when you got stuff, and I think that had an effect on the quality of what was being put out. Now, artists are being looked at more like a machine. So they have to produce, but like the checks and balances are not the same. So I think the middle ground that I'm getting ready to find is inviting people more into like the everyday, like normal stuff. You know what I'm saying? Not trying to increase the creative output so much, like as far as my work and my products, but just increasing my output of my everyday activities. So like, going outside, or like things that I'm doing, like if I visit the zoo, I go to this museum, like things like that, versus me feeling like I got to drop a song every day. I got to drop a product every month. More so just being active, but not overextending myself creatively to exhaust, what I have to offer, or to lower the level of quality.
For sure, absolutely. Yeah. I think that's vital, man. That's important. So, like, as a creative, right? What does the self-care look like, though? Because I feel like we're always creating, right? Regardless of, like I said, me right now podcasting, or if I'm, writing a rap, or I'm in a song, like whatever creative thing I'm doing. What does that self-care look like for you?
Honestly, if I'm not being creative in some capacity, or like at least put myself in a place to absorb something that could inspire me, that's when I'm like not taking care of myself. That's when I'm like depressed. If I'm not in a space where I'm either getting to an idea or working through an idea, I don't feel good. I don't feel like myself.
Yeah, I think self-care is just like really trying to reflect, like where you've been at, where you're headed, where you're becoming, you know what I'm saying, and things like that, and then just owning the moment of now.
Yeah, being present.
Right, being present, man, because I think sometimes we think so futuristic. We're like, oh yeah, bet it's this. Oh yeah, bet it's that. Or like just cherishing like everything that you've been through. Like you accomplished a lot. You know what I'm saying? So give yourself that pat on the back for that, and still try to find inspiration. Like for me, I always think of like God, family, and my support system, because it's like, yeah, that's my why. So like I'd be inspired by that, or just to see different things. But I'm heavy on what you said as well. Like I'm not gonna create unless I feel inspired to do so. You know what I'm saying? Because you don't want it to feel like a job. Like you said, the machine. Oh yeah, they begging on you to do this. They waiting on that next design. They waiting on this. So what you gonna do? And you want to be, mindful of not only like, the brand and everything like that, but just your identity. And you don't want it to get so caught up in the work that's what people just see. You want people to see like, all right, man, like, yo, Tez he's a human being. Give him the grace. Give him everything that he needs. Know what I'm saying? And it's gonna come when it needs to come. Know what I'm saying? Jay, hey, yo. You know what I'm saying? I know what you do. You do the motivation. You help the kids. You in the community. You podcast. But I'm human. You know what I'm saying? I get to it when I get to it.
And like what you said, motivation, like I think that's not valued as much as it should be. In a way where like sometimes, you might get down. I was watching a video yesterday where it was like this 17-year-old kid saying that he makes $1 million a month. And you could sit and think like damn. Like, why am I not making $1 million a month, right? And you start to put your values in, things like that. But when I look back at like literally how many people I inspired through my time to either create a business or like go into a new endeavor or try something new, like I'm wealthy. Yeah. I'm really wealthy in that aspect of my life.
Yeah. And I think that it serves as inspiration. Because like I said, man, before, man, like, you know, the likes of yourself, Sweezo, like I said, Corn. You know what I'm saying? Like a lot of us were, you know, at Ziploc as well, man. I don't want to forget anybody. Anybody that was doing dope stuff at Flowers, man, salute. I just think that it was just inspirational to see it in different pockets and being like, yo, this person was doing this person was doing that. And we were all on our grind.
Mm-hmm.
But we were just experimenting. And the thing that's so beautiful to see now is like, bro, we didn't give up.
Mm-hmm.
We kept going.
No, and that's the part.
Yeah.
That's the part. That's the only way that you for sure won't get to your dreams is if you give up, if you stop. That's the only way. As long as you keep going, you always have an opportunity to get where you're trying to go.
Facts, man. Like,
yeah.
So I guess with it now, like, what are some advice? Like, what's some advice that you would give to like a creative? You know what I'm saying? Like, because I think, like you said before, we see it as a machine. It's produce. So like, someone that wants to enter the creative space, whether it be, you know, visual or like making the music or whatever like that, what is some advice that you would give to a creative?
I think to follow through with the things that you're most passionate about, because that's the thing that you're going to keep doing when you're getting quote unquote nothing from it. You know what I'm saying? Because if you're doing something that you're not really passionate about, when it gets hard, you're going to stop. But when it's something that you're passionate about, even when it get hard, like it's in you, you won't stop. And that's what you need, because it's not always going to be fruitful. You know, it's not always going to be easy. So, you know, if it's something that you just got a strong drive to do, that's the thing, you know, that's the thing to keep looking into. That's the thing to keep digging into.
Got you. And like, what is your, like I said, like for your day to day, like what's your grind and like what's your why? I would say like, you know, like what really inspires you the most. You know what I'm saying?
So I have a quote that I say, like, occupying the space above the sun, because you know they say everything under the sun has already been done.
Yeah.
So my drive and my why is to do something that hasn't been done. You know, I'm driven to innovate. You know.
That's fire. I like that. You know, I think everybody can ask you different questions like what, where, who, when. But when you know your why, I feel like you move different. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And I think that that's very vital. So, like, for people that's out there, like, holding on to your why and really, like, you know, locking in and really finding that purpose and, like, understanding that it's a self-discovery. You know what I'm saying? And it's, like, don't be afraid to take the steps. Like, we could, you know, like, we looked at life as, like, a race or whatever like that, and you just try to finish, like, value every step, value every lap. Because every lap is important, because you're going to build the endurance and everything that you need.
Yeah, and just something on, because I just thought back on when you talk about consistency.
Yes.
So for me, consistency hasn't been like as linear as a lot of people describe it. Like it's been like it's been moving forward, but it's been moving like this. So it's still going forward, but it's moving like this. So when I say that, I mean like I wasn't working on music solely to keep going. I was working on music. When I got exhausted with music, it's clothes. When I got exhausted with clothes, it's this. When I got exhausted with this, it's that. But at the same time, I'm growing all of them as I get along. So the whole time, everything was building.
Yeah.
But it wasn't one thing building. It was multiple things building. And I think that's one way to stay inspired too.
Yeah, not for sure.
Cycle through.
Yeah, for sure. And I think it's like finding those vehicles to the destination, right? Regardless of what path it is. Like, you know, like for me, it was motivational speaking. Then after that, picking up the podcast. Then it was podcast, and then it led to community engagement. Now it's programming. So all these vehicles still add value, like you sat there and said, and it's like, it's going to get you to your destination. And this is this reinvention and realizing, okay, as you're naturally learning, what are you applying as well? So I think it's definitely dope.
That's another why for me too. You said add value.
Yes.
That's another why for me. You know, that's my goal. You know, I want to add value. If I feel like I have nothing to add to it, I'm not going to bother with it.
For sure.
You know?
Yeah, and I think that's definitely dope, man. Like I said, so you're a natural learner, so you read books. What are some books that kind of like helped you or kind of like gauged you as well, man? Because I think it's important to, you know, share that information too, bro.
Yeah, I say a book I'm reading right now is called The 10 Phases of Innovation.
Okay.
That's been a pretty good read. Honestly, like I have a lot of books. I do more of my learning via like video.
Okay.
You know, so I watch a lot of interviews, a lot of documentaries and stuff like that. But I do have books. I find myself like skimming through more than like reading the whole thing. I have a thing where I say like might take a single page out of 1,000 books.
Right.
So I'm just looking for like what meat I want and I leave the rest. You know
Gotcha.
what I'm saying?
Yeah.
But yeah, I do have a lot of books. I think one of my dreams is to like build out a library, like a physical library, but just like for creativity.
Okay.
So somewhere for people to come and get like recharged.
Got you. That's
creatively. You know, you get burnt out and
that's dope.
Yeah.
That's dope. Nah, I'm heavy on the books. You know, those self-help books can definitely help a lot.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the ones that can spark the creativity, Hero on a Mission, like I said, The Way of a Superior Man, like I said, Contagious, Why Things Catch On. It's a couple, like The Spook That Sat by the Door, Just Thinking Different, you know,
Mm-hmm.
and different things like that. Because I feel like all of us have something dope to bring to the table, you know, and I think sometimes we just look at it like, okay, where's the table at?
Yeah.
But take the steps to build it. You know what I'm
Yeah.
saying? Because then you'll realize as you're building, it's like, oh, this person's supposed to be here. This person's supposed to be here too. They just was waiting on you to build something, so that way you could go ahead and do that in that valuable piece, like you said, man. I think that's definitely dope, for sure.
That's real.
Yeah, man. So I guess, what is one thing that you would have told your younger self, and what is the motivation for the people out here? Like, because it's hard, like you said, burnout, things like that. We get discouraged and all that. So, like, what is one thing you would have told your younger self, and what is the motivation for, like, the community and people to know?
One thing I would have told my younger self is you don't know when it's going to happen for you. And sometimes you got to know when to pivot. You need to know how to identify opportunity, how to identify value. And sometimes it's not like the most evident, thing. Sometimes it's something you would have never expected. But to stay open and be curious for what could be.
That's good. I think, for the, like I said, my younger self is just be patient. I think a lot of us, we move off of impulse sometimes, and our emotions get the best of us, so we don't read the situations the way we're supposed to. So, listening to understand as opposed to reply, because I ain't gonna lie, sometimes I feel like I got a lot to say. And it's like, okay, but how are you listening is important, and then just taking it all in, like, continue to be a sponge, continue to learn. I mean, like, every expert was once a beginner.
Yeah, I also would talk to my younger self about debt.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it's important. A lot of like the youth don't understand debt before they get into it, and I think that's an important obstacle to overcome, because when you start at zero versus starting in the negative, it's just a different ball game. You know what I mean? You got more room to explore. You got more room to experiment.
Right.
You're a little bit tenser, I think. You're a little bit more cautious. You can't take as many risks when you're already in the hole.
Right.
So, yeah, that.
Yeah, I ain't gonna lie. Like, I was fortunate to take entrepreneurship at Flowers. Miss Sutton, she taught it. She was a lady from Trinidad. And like I said, she taught us a lot about it. So I think now, even with the youth, like, essential skills like effective communication and things like that too, that can definitely help shape their well-being. Because I think, like I said, mental health now is talked about, how to publicly speak, how to get a job, advocate for yourself, the money management part, like you just sat there and said, the debt part, and then just having an outlet in how to create. I think, they need safe spaces. So, like, embrace the safe spaces and embrace the opportunities. Because like I said, us coming up, it was just the rec, playing basketball, but I didn't take advantage of the resources when I was younger. And now I'm realizing as an adult and helping the kids and, in the educational space, it's like, it's a responsibility to provide that. Because if I don't, I'm in the way. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I think it's not a negative thing to be an outcast, to have a unique perspective on something. Like, if people are like judging you for looking at things in a certain way that the masses are not looking at it, a lot of times that creates an environment where you're the only place for people to experience that. So then, you created a niche in itself right there. Now you have the whole market for that thing because nobody's interested in it right now, but you might be the reason why people get interested in it. Yeah,
for sure, man. And that just served as confirmation as well, because like sometimes I think the issues and the problems you're supposed to solve, like those are just the problems you're supposed to solve. And I think I want people to realize too, like people will pay you to solve problems.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm saying? So let's think about solutions and how we can continue to build and grow, bro. For sure. Yeah, for sure. Well, this was love, bro. Good to see, man. Like this is just transformation, man. Like I said, man, this has been like over a decade, bro. And you still grinding, and you still working and chasing your purpose, bro. I'm proud of you, bro.
Yeah, you still got the same energy, man. That's one thing. Like, oftentimes, like I remember the energy that I got from somebody, and yours has always been genuine, always been like uplifting, and I'm glad you sticking to that, your true self. Yeah,
for sure, man. And you as well, bro. Like I said, man, like the entrepreneur mindset and just seeing it, bro. Like I'm glad I saw it when I did, because like I said, just to see how it transitioned and evolved. And like I said, you're growing and you're expanding and you're constantly learning, man. So never stop learning, bro. Yeah. And the best is yet to come, for sure.
For sure.
Yeah, man.
Thanks for having me.
You already know, man. The harder you grind, the bigger you dream. The harder you grind, the bigger you dream. The harder you grind, the bigger you dream. I said the harder you grind, the bigger you dream. And we out, man.
Soundstripe.